Yesterday, in his statement about Jesse Jackson, the president said, despite the fact that I'm falsely and consistently called a racist by the scoundrels and lunatics on the radical left, Democrats all, it was always my pleasure to help Jesse along the way. Where or when does the president believe he's been falsely called racist?
You're kidding, right?
No.
I will pull you plethora of examples. I'm going to get my team in that room to start going through the internet of radical Democrats throughout the years, Ed, who have accused this president falsely of being a racist. And I'm sure there's many people in this room and on network television across the country who have accused him of the same. In fact, I know that because I've seen it with my own eyes. And the president very much looks forward to having an event later this afternoon at 3 p.m. to celebrate Black History Month and to talk about how his policies are advancing opportunity and prosperity for all Americans through record tax cuts, through the Trump accounts that all Americans can access regardless of race. These are a great thing for the next generation of Americans. The president has also awarded hundreds of millions of dollars in additional funding to strengthen educational outcomes at historically Black colleges and universities across the country. Again, the president is protecting the hard-earned benefits of the 2.4 million Black veterans who honorably served in our nation's armed forces by reducing the backlog of veterans waiting for their VA benefits and for their home loans through the Department of Veterans Affairs. So there is a lot this president has done for all Americans, regardless of race, and he has absolutely been falsely called and smeared as a racist, and I'm happy to provide you those receipts, and we gladly will right after this briefing.
Where do things stand after yesterday's talks?
I think you heard from the administration and the State Department yesterday that there was a little bit of progress made, but we're still very far apart on some issues. I believe the Iranians are expected to come back to us with some more detail in the next couple of weeks, and so the president will continue to watch how this plays out.
Finally, I want to talk about these negotiations that have taken place between the US and Iran. Those talks have been held in Geneva. The reports coming out of Geneva is that that progress has been made, but there is still a lot to discuss. This is what the president had to say ahead of those talks.
Expecting from these Iran talks in Geneva tomorrow.
So I'll be involved in those talks indirectly, and they'll be very important. And we'll see what can happen. It's been typically, Iran's a very tough negotiator. They're good negotiators, or bad negotiators. I would say they're bad negotiators because we could have had a deal instead of sending the B-2s in to knock out their nuclear potential. And we had to send the B-2s. I hope they're going to be more reasonable. They want to make a deal.
Have you been told that a deal is next to impossible?
No, I think they want to make a deal. I don't think they want the consequences of not making a deal. They want to make a deal.
We've also heard from President Trump just in the last few days that regime change would be the best thing to happen. So it seems as though it's a matter of when, not if, that US attacks Iran. What's your sense of where things are at?
Yeah, there's a reason why there's two carrier groups right now floating around Iran. Iran knows that President Trump's not all about talk, just like the last 20 years of other presidents said, well, we're not going to take anything off the table. Yeah, you did. You were never considering any kind of action against Iran in terms of kinetic action. But the president decided, hey, we're going to show that to be something we can use, and they did use it. And that's why Iran is back at the table. You know, in the negotiation they're having now, look, do I think it's going to come to fruition? Probably not. But I'll tell you one thing, that they're focusing not just on their nuclear issue, right, which everybody else talked about, but focusing on things that other presidents did not, particularly Barack Obama and Joe Biden, their ballistic capability, their continuing funding of militant organizations around the world. Yeah, I've said it before a million times, it bears repeating. The Iranian regime falling will be one of the most consequential foreign policy achievements since the fall of the Soviet Union, and that's not hyperbole, that is actual fact and truth, okay? And Obama's failure on the GCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which, by the way, you have to be smoking a joint, some California kush to have signed that, because it was an awful, absolutely awful deal, was one of the hallmarks of foreign policy failures of Barack Obama, which Donald Trump got us out of quickly. You know, one quick story. You know, I remember when I was there doing the negotiation of the JCPOA, first of all, the U.S. negotiators and the Iran negotiators were staying in a $1,200 a night hotel. That says a lot about our taxpayer dollars and even the Iranian taxpayer dollars. I stayed at the Marriott 100 yards away for $250 a night. But when I spoke with the U.S. negotiators, and it shows how different times have, you know, what the changes have been since then and now, I remember talking to them over drinks and saying, well, okay, I know you're trying to negotiate, and there's a different approach to how I would deal with this issue, but we do both agree that Iran is trying to build a nuclear weapon. They laughed at me. They said, you're so naive. We're experts. Of course we don't know that. We're not certain of that. And that's what led to that disastrous agreement, the JCPOA. So yeah, I'm all for it. I love what Trump is doing, and hopefully we're going to see a new regime in Iran in the near future.
Well, we're watching it all very closely. Army Horowitz, filmmaker, thank you so much for your time. Great to speak with you.
Always a pleasure.
Well, Iran's supreme leader is throwing threats around as nuclear talks with the US resume, but Tehran still won't meet Washington's core demand to stop enriching uranium. Now, the White House is giving Iran 2 weeks to close the gap, but Trump's also ramped up military pressure in the region. Joining me now is former Defence Deputy Secretary for Strategy, Peter Jennings. Peter, good to see you. What's your read on this? Is this diplomacy or just a countdown now to strikes?
I think the Trump administration wants to be seen to give Iran the opportunity to negotiate, but I agree with you. I don't think Iran is going to stop wanting to try to build its nuclear weapons program, and I think they will also continue to repress the protesters in the streets, which is something that Trump has also said is unacceptable. So I think we're at a point where a strike is now close. I would say 48 hours, 72 hours away. And that's based on seeing a very significant number of American combat aircraft moving in from Europe into the Middle Eastern theatre. And really the last thing to watch for, which is what happened last June, is American air-to-air refuelers come into the theatre because they're there to keep those fighters in the air. And I think that's the final stage. So, you know, by the time we get to the weekend, Australian time, I think that's the highest likelihood chance of an American strike at that point.
All right, so a couple of days. I note as well the Iranian Supreme Leader is threatening US warships in the Gulf. Is he bluffing, or could there also be retaliation on that end too?
There's a lot of bluff, that's for sure, but I think if the Americans do strike, it's going to be comprehensive. They won't just be making the rubble bounce higher on the nuclear facilities. They will be doing things like going after the Iranian Navy, those ships which have the capacity to lay mines in the Straits of Hormuz. I think they'll also be going after the leadership of the Iranian Guards Force, and perhaps even the police and intelligence and internal security command and control system. And so what that means, Danica, is it's going to be a broad strike. It's not just going to be against a handful of nuclear facilities. And I think that's why we're seeing the Americans now engaged in a very substantial build-up of military capability. They have for weeks been flying in stocks with heavy transport aircraft, for example. So this is not going to be trivial, and it's going to be quite broad in its focus, I think.